Bare necessity, but simple bare necessity. Bare necessity, but simple bare necessity.
Hey there, it's Bree Bear and welcome to today's video. I'm very excited because I keep putting this off and no more, sister. We're getting it done today. I'm going to talk about completing the Hunger Games Trilogy for the very first time. Okay, backstory time. So a few years ago, as in like a lot of years ago, as in when this series first came out, I started reading it on the recommendation of a friend. She said, hey, I heard this book. It's about teenagers getting thrown into an arena and having to kill each other to survive. And I said, okay, I read Regency Christian fiction right now. I haven't read anything like this. Let's try it. Makes sense, right? So here I go. And I actually enjoyed it, despite the fact that it was very different from anything I was reading at the moment. Everything that I was reading at that time was like Julie Clausen for sure, Kathy Marie Hake, Tracy Pearson, Judith Miller. You get the idea. Go look up some of those authors and you'll, or at least one of them, and you'll kind of get the idea of what I was reading. Like 1800s, either Europe or usually West-ish. Not like Western, but like an East girl that has moved to the West and is like meeting up with a cowboy and like falling in love, but like clean because I was like 12 or less, and we weren't ready for all that. And so that's kind of what I was reading at the time. I read a few contemporaries, but I wasn't really into fantasy at the moment at all. I hadn't read fantasy as much in a while that I can think of. So no sci-fi, nothing fantasy really at the moment. I had read fantasy as a kid, but I hadn't really read any that in that era of my life. So it was a jump to say the least, but I didn't hate it. I wasn't mad at it. I liked it. It did put me in a weird headspace, partially I think because I wasn't quite in the right space for it, because it just made me mad at the universe in some ways, and like the way that people can, I got frustrated at times, let's say it that way. But I read book 1 and then I read book 2. I was reading them through my Nook, which is legit right here. In fact, the friend that I'm talking about wrote in my Nook case. She wrote in it right here. She's, I love you, Kinsey. Shout out to Mackenzie McKee. But this was my life right here. Was this ancient Nook that doesn't work very well anymore. And this is where I was reading them from. So I have them there still on ebook. But I did not want to reread them on ebook because I wanted to be able to annotate. So I read them in these physical hardbacks for this adventure that we're talking about today. Sorry, I had to go change my lipstick. It was feeling really funky and like drying, and I think it's just old at this point. Like it's, or I knew it was old, but like I definitely think that it's like done old. So I had to change my lipstick. So we're going with it. But where was I? So I read book 1 and book 2, and then they announced the movie for everything before I got to book 3, and I really lost interest at that point because everybody started reading it, and I realized something about myself. I don't like trends. I tend to dislike trends. So if something becomes excessively popular, I'm probably not going to be interested in it. I'm probably going to dislike it. Partially, I think I've realized the reason in part is because everybody freaks out about one thing, like one music artist or one book or one movie. and they neglect all the other good ones out there because everyone is obsessed with just the one or just the few, just like these elite few things that are like everyone's obsessed with, but all these other great things are out there that deserve attention too. So I think that's a large part of why. Another part of why is because I think people don't recognize some of the problematic elements or the bad things so often when it comes to overhyped artists or movies or books or whatever. So there's, I think, a couple of the reasons why I am the way that I am. But that's why I didn't finish this trilogy, in a nutshell. So I read, like I said, books 1 and 2, and then I stopped. Another part of the reason I think is because my friend that turned me onto the books also spoiled me for the last book. She told me what was going to happen in two different things. She told me what was going to happen. Speaking of spoilers though, I am going to be talking in-depth spoilers for books, for the books in the original trilogy throughout the entire video. Once we get towards the end, I will talk about Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and I will do a spoiler-free section about that book as well as a spoilery section towards the end. So you can watch almost the whole video without getting spoilers for Ballad, and then at the end I will give a second spoiler warning specifically for Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. So if you're wondering about if I'm going to do spoilers, yes for the original trilogy throughout the whole video, Ballad not until the end, and I will warn you before I go into spoilers for it. So there you go. Alright, so I'm going to talk about these 3 books first, and I don't have any kind of script, so just bear with me. So before I forget, the 2 things that I was spoiled for in regards to book 3 were Prim dying and Peeta getting brainwashed. Those were the 2 things that I was spoiled for about book 3. So in all 3 of these books, there were plot elements that were mistakes, or kind of like, you know, there were plot holes throughout all 3 books. That I definitely can remember. I think that plot-wise, I think book 2 was probably the best. Writing-wise, let's get into some writing elements. Oh boy, did these books need to be longer. We did not get enough time to experience the environment. We did not get enough descriptions of the costumes, of what people were wearing in, like, I wanted to know what every one of the costumes for each of the tributes looked like for the parades, and we didn't get that, and I'm mad about it. We also did not get enough time in the arena. We didn't get to experience the intensity enough. We didn't get to feel like we were there enough, because it just breezed by so quickly, that we didn't really get to like live in it for long enough. So I really just wish they were longer, is my main complaint in regards to that. In regards to tact, if you don't know what tact is, it's the way I refer to trigger warnings, archetypes, aka tropes, content, or controversial topics, themes, and adumbration, which is another word for representation. So in regards to those things, it definitely did not age well in some elements, especially the first book did not age well. I think the first book is the worst when it comes to tact. It's not tactful at all. It really is painful in some elements. Mental health representation is awful in the first book and gets so dramatically different in books 2 and 3 in regards to that. Like, it's so dramatically improved. I don't know what happened, but I'm here for it. I am so here for it. That said, let's move into the relationships. Oh boy. Oh boy. As far as character development goes, book 1, we really get character development through their past experiences and learning more about their pasts, as well as like in relationship development, we learn more about, or the characters grow as they learn more about their pasts. And that to me really was annoying because they were going through so much that it should have included them growing due to their circumstances more, and we didn't really get that. So that was another complaint of mine that I forgot to mention. Let's go ahead and get the romantic relationships out of the way so I can just get it off my chest and be done. I hate them in this trilogy. I think they're very poorly done. I don't think that any of the romance is done well. I always, okay, going back to before, I was on the PETA side of things from the beginning when I first read them, and I still am. I understand people who are pro Gale, but I don't think she ever was in love with Gale. And it's kind of like when I was talking about Twilight, I just think that they tried to take this whole friend thing and be like, oh, they're friends, they must have had at least considered romantic things with each other at some point. And I don't think that's very fair to like force that kind of idea, especially because I don't think that there was actually any romantic tension between these two characters. I don't think that she ever really felt that way about him, and the only time she really started to feel that way is when it was like, oh, I can't have him, therefore I'm gonna start liking him. And I just think it's dumb. I just think it's dumb. I don't like it. I don't like it. So I was definitely not pro Gale. But I'm also disappointed in the fact that we did not get enough reason to really believe that Katniss had fallen in love with PETA either. Like, we never really had a reason to believe that they were in love. Because, yeah, they were in the arena together twice and they experienced some intense things together. But we never really saw this shift in things. It never really fully clicked for me. We never got that moment where we knew that they really did love each other. And it like that, like there was never a moment where it was like, the only reason I would choose to do this is just because I love you, not any other reason. Because like everything was so layered with reason, or like everything that happened and all the choices that they made were so often for multiple reasons. And because of that, we never got this moment of them really saying and showing like an intense amount of love and nothing for that other person and nothing else, like choosing that person over themselves or over other things. I don't know how to explain it, but basically it just didn't feel like they really ever showed like being in love with one another, and that really really bugs me, because like if it had really come full circle enough, then it would have been different, but it didn't. That said, love triangle did not really come into play until book 2, or like the end of book 1. Actually, no, it was definitely book 2. Because at the end of book 1, we find out that, or PETA finds out that Katniss was actually faking the whole time. And then we start book 2, and Gale comes back into the picture, and things get a little messy. And then we go to book 3, and PETA comes back into the picture, and again, things are weird. Not as weird, because it's kind of clear at that point that she's never going to be with Gale. Like, she doesn't think she would ever be with Gale already by the beginning of book 3. So it was kind of just something to spice up book 2 a little bit, I guess. And it wasn't really explored as like a really valid option in book 1 or book 3. It wasn't a valid option anywhere but book 2. And in book 2, it wasn't a valid option either. So it made no sense to even exist as a possibility or as an idea. And I don't know why it became such a big, oh, I'm Team Gale. Because there is no Team Gale to be had. It happened for 1 of 3 books. And not even the whole book at that. Because he was pissed at her most of the time. Let's be real. Just saying. Let's talk about some other types of relationships that we have in these books. So we have the mother and daughter relationship. Oh, I hate it. I hate it so much. And here's the reason why. It's partially because of the mental health representation and the discussion of it throughout the books. Makes the mother look horrible. And it's not really fair either. I don't think it really is. I don't know. It just never really fit to me. It didn't feel right. It didn't sit right. It didn't feel like it belonged in the story that way. There had to have been some other reason. I think there should have been something else. And I don't like the way that Katniss is so disrespectful to her mother. Written to be what Suzanne Collins wanted at the time to make her character, you know, Katniss's character seem strong. And I think that, again, that's really what it felt like to me reading the first book, was that she wrote the mother specifically to make Katniss a certain way, not so that the mother was her own character, but rather so that she, you know, she was a plot device to me, and I hated that. Like, there would be nothing wrong with it if it felt like genuine and it felt natural, but it didn't feel natural. It felt forced to be that way, and it felt forced for Katniss to be so demanding and pushy to her mom and to be so aggressive in how strong she was. It was like this forced feeling of strength where it's like it didn't feel right at times. It didn't feel comfortable or not comfortable. It didn't feel natural and genuine. It felt arrogant a lot of times, and that element to me as characters, as individuals, of course played out horribly in their relationship, in my opinion. I just don't think that this relationship was dealt with very well in the writing. I think there could have been so much more to it. They could have grown so much more. We could have seen so much happen there that we didn't see, because instead we decided to do a love triangle that shouldn't have existed. So there you go. We could have instead used book 2 to really see a change in the mother-daughter relationship, but instead we threw in a little love triangle that we're going to take right back away in the next book. So there you go. So then we have the sister-sibling relationship. There are elements of it that I can be down with. But again, Prim does not get enough of a character. We don't see enough of her until book 3. And the reason for that is because, again, spoilers, but because she wanted to rip our hearts out. She did that specifically so she could kill Prim at the end. Like, from the beginning, the real reason for like this whole thing going down the way it did is because of her protective nature over her sister, who we don't see hardly at all until book 3. And then we see her and we get to experience a little bit of character from her just so that we can care enough when she's killed off at the end. I'm just saying. She was done very dirty. She was not treated well as a character. She needed to have like growth throughout this more so. We should have seen more of her during, you know, the in-between time. Should have seen like, and again, it needed to be longer. And you know, part of it is because we're in the arena, books 1 and 2. We're in the arena for a good chunk of the book, or we're going from place to place leading up to going into the arena. So we don't see her for that reason, which makes sense. But then in the last book, she smashes a bunch of trying to make Prim this precious thing that you can't help but love, so that you will be upset when she kills her off. Even though there was no reason for Prim to die. I said it. Somebody needed to say it. I don't know if anybody else has really said it before, but I'm gonna say it. Prim's death was pointless. The only reason that they chose to have Prim die is to make Katniss question what happened and why. And so that she would figure out the whole thing about the other lady, which I can't even think of her name at the moment. That, the commander lady, whatever her name is, that, which could have been figured out in another way, other than killing Prim. But the other thing was really the main reason, let's be real, that it feels like it was done. Because it could have been done not to Prim. Like, the same thing could have happened without Prim there, and Katniss could have figured it out. Should have figured it out. Because it was their tactic that they had come up with. So they didn't even need to, like, they should have figured that out from the beginning, that it was their tactic, not President Snow, that did that. So, that aside, we also have the element of, what do you call? Gale, that's the word. I was trying to remember where I was going with that. So Gale is the real reason that I think she chose to do it. Because she wanted a reason for people to not be mad at her. Because Katniss could never be with Gale if he was part of the reason why Prim is dead, right? And so that is obviously the real reason that she did it, because she was trying to avoid people being mad at her for the love triangle that she put in book 2 that we could have avoided by not having. So we could have avoided the whole thing of Prim dying in book 3 if book 2 had been about the mother-daughter relationship instead of about the Gale-Katniss relationship. I'm just saying. I am just throwing it out there. So, in other words, I think that the main choice of Prim dying is just to make you cry. It wasn't necessary to the plot. Because regardless of whether Prim had been in there or not, Katniss would have figured out, Gale would have figured out that that was their tactic that they had come up with. And that President Snow couldn't have been the one to do it. So, that's one of my biggest complaints, is the love triangle, the poor treatment of relationships outside of Gale, Katniss, and Peeta's relationships. And finally, the choices in regards to Prim's death and all of that in book 3. Those are my 3 biggest complaints. Other things that I didn't like. I hate that we don't get all of the tributes' names. And I hate that we don't get a chart with the names of the tributes and who they are, where they're from, that kind of thing. Like, oh my gosh, one of my biggest complaints, book 1, Foxface. I hate it so much. Why are we calling her Foxface? And then in the freaking movie, then they actually like say it in the movie. I actually made my own charts. You can kind of see it in this one. I like tracked as we went about things. Like I made notes. I did the district, what the district is known for. Another thing that we should have had a chart for. The male and female tribute from each one. I would put who killed them and notes about that tribute as well, to kind of what do you call, keep it organized in my brain. So let's talk about things I liked. Things I like about this trilogy is the world. I love the arenas. I really enjoy experiencing them, and I wish we got more in depth about them. I really, of the 2 arenas here, the second one is by far my favorite because it's so much more intricate and like it's so much more intensely crafted and like thought out. And that is something I really, really enjoyed a lot, that there was so much to it. There are definitely some good quotes and good moments, and there are definitely some bad ones in all 3 of the books as far as writing goes, good and bad moments as far as like things I liked and disliked in the choices, but also in like good lines and bad lines. There are some cringy ones and there are some beautiful ones. So they do balance pretty well. I have to say, going back and rereading them, I enjoyed them more than I thought I was going to. I thought I was going to dislike them even more because again, I quit reading them because they got so hyped. And so in my head, I had this like negative, I was like emphasizing the negative elements more than I actually had felt when I was reading them, because everyone was like, oh my god, and I was like, there's so many other books that are also good. Can we give them some love too, please? So I think that these actually did stand up through time pretty well so far. Again, it's not been incredibly long since they first came out, in comparison to some other books that I will be reading for this kind of first time reading, first time finishing thing. Book 1 is, I think, my least favorite. Book 2 is definitely my favorite. Book 3, better than book 1 because I think there was more development in the characters and I think it was just better overall, but not as good as book 2. So here is my ranking of the original trilogy. Let's move into my thoughts on the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I'm gonna try to do some non-spoiler thoughts first. So, gosh, this book was unexpected in some ways. In some ways I anticipated kind of the direction it was gonna go. And in other ways I did not anticipate some elements. So it was a wild ride. Let's say that. I will say that it did captivate me for the majority of the book. I know that some people have said things about being bored through it, or at least I heard one person who read it and was bored. Not me. I wasn't bored. It is less actiony than some of the last, like especially less actiony than like the last 2 in the than the second 2 in the trilogy, because of where our main character and our main perspective is. interesting element about this is that it is told in third person. These are told in first person. I'm kind of surprised by that because of the fact that it's supposed to be like a prequel to the trilogy, and I kind of expected it to be in the same POV. If you don't know, this follows President Snow as he grew up kind of like in school, in like his latter days of school. He was like, I think like a senior or something like that kind of vibe. So this is right after the war, and the whole District 13 thing happened, is kind of the time frame that this is set. So this is like towards the beginnings of the games that this is happening. And so the games are still kind of being developed and created, and like they're not really as structured and organized and like planned out as we see in the trilogy, because it's the very beginning of them really happening, and they haven't really taken off the same way that we see in later years. They're not really at that point yet. So that's an interesting element, is we see the development of the games becoming what we saw in the trilogy, which I enjoyed that aspect of it a lot. So we also, of course, are following President Snow, and so we're seeing his, you know, kind of figuring out who he is, trying to, you know, settle in on his character and who he's going to become. Like, he's trying to decide who he's going to be. And there are already, from the very beginning, driving forces that are pushing him a certain direction. But as the story goes, there are different tugs in different directions, and you don't really know for sure which way he's gonna go unless you've read the trilogy. Which is an interesting idea to me, that if you were reading this without knowing anything about him, you wouldn't know where it was gonna go, for sure, based on the way it's written. Which I really enjoyed that element, the kind of waffling back and forth between how is he going to turn out, what is going to happen to him, even though I already knew, like, you know, whoop, almost dropped it. It was kind of presented in this way of like, if you were to read this before you read those, then you would be like unsure of how it was, you know, if you didn't know that Coriolanus was going to become President Snow, then you would be like, what's going to happen here? Is he going to turn out to be a bad guy or a good guy? So that's kind of an element of this as well. And so in that way, a lot of people would consider this a villain origin story, which I would definitely say in some ways, yes. But it also, to me, feels like kind of an origin story of the games as a whole. Not just President Snow, but like the games as a whole, the capital as a whole, and how they responded and repaired themselves after the District 13 incidents. We also see the repercussions of that war on the capital, which is something I really enjoyed and appreciated seeing. We don't ever see that side of the capital through the trilogy. We don't see anybody that talks about or remembers or recognizes the hardships that were experienced by the people who lived in the capital. Like the citizens who were affected by the war, because there were a lot of citizens that were severely affected, and they were the innocent citizens, not the ones that had choice. You know, some of them, obviously not all of them, but some of them didn't really have control over the situation, power, or it's kind of hard to decipher. So seeing that element as well was enjoyable. It's definitely longer than the original books, which I liked that element because we got more in-depth growth in character development as well as the plot. and we got more in-depth descriptions, which I enjoyed. All in all, here's my thing. There was a specific portion or a specific thread throughout this book that I was anticipating happening. This specific, like, plot choice that I was anticipating and I figured was gonna happen, or assumed that was probably gonna happen, and I did not want to have happen, and it did, and I was not for it. I hated it, as a matter of fact, because of the fact, well, let me back up a little bit. I didn't hate it entirely. I just disliked it a lot because I felt like it was a cop-out. And I didn't feel like it was done in a way that was really as realistic because of the timeline. I also there were some things towards the end that I was not a fan of, like some choices at the end and how it like finished that I was not a fan of, that didn't feel quite as well done as they could have been. I think I put it at a 3, but I think in my review I talked about that it was honestly like a 3.5. I don't know, I might bump it up to a 4. Another thing you might be wondering is, should you read Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes? I would vote yes, you should read it, but I would say you need to read it at the right time. Knowing that it's not super intensely action-based, knowing that the romance ain't that romancy and ain't super intense or anything. Know that going into it. My spoilery thoughts! So at this point I am going to switch into spoilers for Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, so be warned that if you have not yet completed it, I will be going in depth on some details of things that happen in this book. Snow lands on top. One of the motivating elements of his character is family pride and restoring his family name, that kind of thing. So that was kind of an interesting element that it took it in that direction, or that she took it in that direction, that was part of it. But I kind of thought it was a smart choice. So then we get into meeting Lucy Gray, and she is the tribute that he ends up working with. And immediately you start getting the vibes that something is going to happen between the two of them. And I was dreading that because I wanted them to really care for each other, but I didn't want it to be this insta-lovey and then something stupid happens and he's mad and he hates the universe type thing. And that's pretty much what happened. And I hate that. I really hate it. A lot. Oh Lord. So, yeah, was not a fan of the fact that there was a romance in this book. But there were elements of the romance that were written really well and that I enjoyed seeing. I just wish it hadn't have existed in the book. Everything that happened with Sejanus should have been enough to propel Coriolanus forward. And the things that happened with Lucy Gray towards the end weren't necessary to propel him forward. If the things with Sejanus had been emphasized strongly enough, then the whole Lucy Gray thing could have been done without it like feeling like that was the reason. I don't know. A lot of people are going to go into this book or look at this book and think, oh, he's going to fall in love with a tribute and then she's going to die in the arena. Okay, well, first of all, yes, he does fall in love with a tribute. Second of all, no, she doesn't die in the arena. Third of all, does he really fall in love with a tribute if this is the way that he deals with it? I don't think you can really call it falling in love. So there's just a lot of thoughts to do with that. And that, I guess, is my main complaint about the whole book, is this whole romantic element. Like, if we could have done the whole thing without the romantic element, or with like this possibility of like, I could have fallen in love with you, but you suck, or something like that, would have been a totally different scenario, I feel like. And it would have really took this book to another level. But because we had to have a romance in it, because we can't have a YA book, especially a YA dystopian, without a forbidden romance, it kind of lost a little bit of flavor there because of that. We were seeing things in real time. We were watching them figure it out as they went. And I really loved that. I really loved that aspect of it. So I have to say, though, I really enjoyed the creepy scientist element. Because the mad scientist in this really reminds me of the mad scientist in Wonder Woman. And as much as I hate both of them, I also enjoy both of them. Because, like, they're so freaking smart, but also so screwy. Like, they're so messed up. It's so weird. Like, it's like one of those you love to hate them type of vibes. And I'm here for it because they're just screwed up for the sake, like, there's no rhyme or reason to their madness. They're not villains for a special reason. They're not a special snowflake villain that's been through a lot, so they turned bad. No, they just like have this screwy perspective on the universe, and I'm here for that kind of villain, because I am not a big redemption arc type of person. I'm not usually here for that. I like a good redemption arc, but I don't like them very often. There are very few redemption arcs that I'm really here for. Like, it has to be a good one. It has to be good. And so I enjoy a character that you just know that they're not going to be redeemed because they're just messed up. Perspective is exactly what they embody, is just really messed up perspectives. And I enjoyed that element of it. Enjoyed the fact that we kind of see all of these different things that are feeding into Coriolanus and like who he becomes, and like all of these, you know, confusing things that kind of make it difficult for him to really settle on who he is going to be for a little bit there, and all of that. However, there's also this aspect that I feel like we didn't get enough of a reason why he turned the way he did. Because of what happened with Sejanus, I would almost want to say that he would have turned the opposite way, you know? Like, it was obviously a turning point, but I just feel like there needed to be a little bit more of a nudge as to why he would turn the way he did. And again, a lot of it I think has to do with his desire for control. I think that's really the root of Coriolanus, is his desire for control. And he thinks that power is what gives him control, and that's why he becomes who he becomes. However, I just feel like we needed a little extra nudge that didn't have to do with Lucy Gray. You know, like I feel like we need a little extra nudge with Sejanus, because everything that happened with him was amazingly well done and very impactful on Coriolanus, but I think they needed to become a little bit tighter. It needed to have impacted him more. Like, it already destroyed him, but I just wanted it to really rip him even more, to the point where that was the turning point for him, and that was the change. That was the moment that he needed control over everything. It did feel very like, oh, okay, here we go. And it also did feel very insta-lovey, very forced romance. It didn't like, and again, that's kind of how I felt in the original trilogy too, that she just doesn't lead up to romance very well. She doesn't create romance in a way that feels authentic. Final thoughts about this experience. Am I glad that I finished it? Finished the trilogy? Yes, because that means that I did read Ballad, and I don't think I would have read Ballad if I hadn't finished the trilogy. So I'm glad that I did for that reason, as well as for the fact that, yes, we did get character development a little bit more, and we got better mental health representation in Mockingjay as opposed to how we started out in the trilogy with really bad mental health conversations. So I really do think that this trilogy grew a lot, and that Suzanne Collins grew a lot as a writer from the beginning of the trilogy to the end, as well as within Ballad. I don't think that, you know, it was like an exponentially insane amount of, you know, improvement between the trilogy and Ballad, but I think that it was still pretty well done. And I think that there were improvements to her writing in certain aspects. So that being said, I'm glad to finally have sat down and filmed this. I plan on trying to do better about how I filmed these videos. And again, I'm trying to remember what I was thinking for the name for this series. I think it was like at one point I was thinking like bandwagon books, to call it like something that for books that had been popular or hyped at some point and that I haven't read. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to not miss any of those, and I will see you soon with another video. Peace out, Bear Scouts.
About your worries and your stress. I mean it, bare necessities. That's why a bear can rest at ease with just the bare necessities of life. Yeah, with just the bare necessities of life.